Masechet Ketubot Daf Samech Chet. We're dealing with the problem of the rich poor, which includes several categories. One is someone who was formerly rich and used to a high standard of living, but now is poor. And we saw a bunch of stories about that. Also, someone who is rich but is stingy and will not spend any money on themselves, and whether we have to support them. So they are currently rich, but it's like they're poor. Other people are actually poor, but they refuse to be helped. So we have to help them also and give them a loan and make them feel have a way to help them with dignity. So that's yet another category. And the last one here that we're dealing with is someone who is fake. He's actually rich, but he's making believe he's poor. And so we saw Rabbi Chanina gave food to such a family every week, but then it turns out that they didn't need it. They were swindlers, they were faking. And so instead of being upset about it, he said, right, we should be thankful to the tricksters, because if not for them, every time that someone asks for money and we don't give, we would be liable. They could call out, and we would have a sin. And because they're around, so we have a way out. We could say, well, there are a lot of swindlers around, so that's that's why I didn't give to that person. Okay, but now we're going to emphasize the sin of not giving. ותענה רבי חייא בר רב מדפתי, רבי יהושע בן קורחה אומר, כל המעלים עיניו מן הצדקה, כאילו עובד עבודה זרה. Anyone who averts his eyes, makes believe he doesn't see someone asking, so that he doesn't have to give charity, it's the same as idolatry. How do we know? כתיב אחא הישמר לך פן ידבר אם לבבך בליעל. Regarding not giving someone a loan when it comes close to the Shavuot year, he says, be careful, don't do that. Maybe you'll have a evil thought in your heart, a base thought, bilial, to say, well, the 7th year is coming, I may not give him. So that's called bilial. And similarly, regarding people who seduce others to come and do idolatry, it also uses the word bilial. That's idolatry. This is the same as idolatry. Hatanu Rabbanan, hamesame et aino, v'amesbet bitno, v'mekapech et shoko, no niftar min ha'olam ad shebo lideh kach. Another statement about tricksters. Someone who makes believe he is blind, or makes believe his stomach is bloated as if he were starving on hunger. Or he makes believe that his leg is crushed, he's lame, but he's only doing that so that he could collect money. He will not leave the world until that actually happens to him. He's making believe, you know what, that's what you want? Okay, he'll get it. And similarly, anyone who accepts charity, even though he doesn't need it, in the end, he will not leave the world until he actually needs it. All right, one more Mishnah from Pe'ah about the level. What is the level of poverty below which someone is entitled to take Pe'ah and leket and charity funds? Tanan hatam en mechayvin oto limkor et beto ve'et kele tashmisho. Mishnah teaches that the base amount in the Mishnah there is 200 dinar. If he has 200 dinar liquid, then or more, then he's not called poor. But if he has less than that, then he's poor and he's entitled. So now the question is, well, what if he has real estate? He has or vessels, things that are not liquid. So do we need to make him sell it? Then he'll be above the 200 mark. Mishnah says, no, we do not make him sell his house and his other vessels. Okay, we ask about the Mishnah. Velo, v'hatanya, haya mishtamesh b'klei zahab, yishtamesh b'klei kesef, b'klei kesef, yishtamesh b'klei nehoshet. Hold on, we have a Baraita that says, if he uses golden vessels, then he should use silverware. If he's used to silver, then he should use copper. In other words, he should sell his fancy things for something lower, and rather than take a charity. So how can we reconcile this Mishnah with this Baraita? Where the one that says he's required to sell is talking about his bed and his table. You have a fancy bed or fancy table, sell it for a cheaper one. But regarding cups and plates, that even if they're fancy, you don't have to sell it. Why not? So the Mishnah is talking about tableware. So why not? Because he says it's disgusting to me. Cups and plates are things that he's actually eating from. His food is touching it. And so if he's used to using gold, and then you only give him silver, it's really going to affect him. He won't be able to eat from them. So we ask about that. So maybe a bed and a table also. He's like, a bed, this kind of bed, I'm used to a fancier bed. Am I going to sleep on this? So we still don't understand. What's the difference? We're talking about something like a silver comb, which is a huge luxury. Even most people don't have a silver comb. And so that kind of thing, a comb made out of wood works just as well. And so it's just, if it's that kind of luxury, we make him sell it. But you're right, if it's something that as a regular use item, like a tableware or a table itself that he'll be disgusted with, then we don't make him sell it. That's one answer. Another answer. Papa Amar lakashya kan kodem sheyavo lidei giboy kan lachar sheyavo lidei giboy. It depends at what point. If he acquired these fancy items before he came to collect charity, then we let him keep it. Right? He had them from before, so we don't make him sell it. But his cash is less than 200. He can take charity. Whereas if he receives these fancy items after he already started collecting, so then we say you can't keep them, right? Somehow he got his hands on some fancy table, fancy tableware. Then he has to sell those in order to not and rather than continue collecting from charity. All right, next Mishnah. Yetoma shesiata ima o acheha mida'ata v'chatbu la b'me'a o b'chamishim zuz. You have an orphan girl, meaning her father died. Usually the father will set the amount of the dowry, but since he's not around, and the mother or the brother are marrying her off, which they can do while she is still a minor. We talked about this. It's Kiddushin Midrabanan. And so they're the ones that are going to decide the dowry, and they write only a little amount, only 100 or even less, 50 zuz for her dowry. So you can understand why they would do that, because the brothers are giving from their own estate. They're the ones that inherit the father, so they naturally want to be stingy. Unless maybe they really like their sister. But let's say they are stingy and they give her very little. When she becomes an adult, she can look and say, what is this? Now I'm more aware. Well, you gave me only 50 zuz. I'm entitled to a tenth. We saw before that we encourage a father to give a tenth of all his property as a dowry. It's almost kind of evens out the inheritance, depending on how many kids there are, of course, but this would be a significant sum that would be somewhat equal to the inheritance that the sons get, the daughter gets through the dowry, and it goes to her and her husband that they will use throughout their marriage. At the end of the marriage, she will get paid back from the husband that same amount. So when she gets older, she can say, hey, you only gave me 50. I never agreed to that. I was a minor. So even if it's mida'ata, even if she did agree to that as a minor, she didn't know what she was talking about when she was a minor. She can protest when she's an adult and take the full value of approximately a tenth. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Im hisi et habat harishona, yinaten hasheniya kederech shenatan larishona. So Rabbi Yehuda says, if the father did marry off the first, but he was alive when the first daughter got married, and then he died, and then they married off the second daughter. So we can estimate what he would want to give, right? We can tell this is a kind of person that gives his daughter X amount. That's what he gave his first daughter. So we do the same thing for the second. We assume he would have done the same thing. וחכמים אומרים פעמים שאדם עני ועשיר או עשיר ועני אלא שמן נכסים ונותנים לה. חכמים say, not necessarily. Sometimes a person is poor and becomes wealthier. So maybe the first daughter he gave a little, but then he'll want to give more. Or the other way around, maybe he gave the first daughter a lot because he was doing well that year, and then he became poor and he's going to give less. So you can't assume that whatever he gave the first, he would want to give the second. Rather, we don't use we use one objective amount. Ella shemit nechasim v'notnim la. We take we appraise his property as it is at the time of his death, and we take a tenth of that. And that's what we use, whether it's more or whether it's less than what he gave to the first daughter. All right, so now we're going to analyze this Mishnah with the statement of Amar Shemuel, Lefanasa Shamin Ba'av. So the word Parnasa, it can mean multiple things. It can mean what the father feeds the child, but the more usual meaning of parnasa is the dowry. So regarding the dowry, we have to estimate it based on what a father would give. In other words, people that know the father said, what kind of person was he? Was he generous? Did he like giving a lot? Would he want to give a large dowry or not? So that's how we decide how much it is. That's Shemuel's opinion. It's subjective based on what we know about the father. Now, Me'atiber, we challenge Shemuel. Habanot nizonot umitparnesot minichse avihen. We have a baraita that says that daughters are going to be fed and mitparnesot, the same word as parnasa, taken care of, sum dowry, from the property of the father. Now, kesad, en omrim ilu havi hakayam kach vekach haya noten la, ela sheminat nechasim v'notnim la. The Baraita continues and explains how so. We do not say if the father was alive, then we assume he would want to give this much or that much. In other words, we don't use a subjective standard by doing mind reading of what the father would have wanted. We estimate the property and then we give it to him. So estimate the property is an objective ratio. Now when it says parnasa, is this not talking about the dowry? It means the amount that goes to the husband. I mean, she brings it into the marriage and the husband will use it while they're married. So isn't it talking about the dowry? And here it says the dowry is is a given percentage of the property and not an estimate of what he would have in mind. So this is against Shemuel. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak lo beparnasat asma. Says no. When it says parnasa here, nizonet umit parnesot, it's not the usual meaning of parnasa, which usually means dowry or parnasat habal, but rather what she eats before she's married, while she's in her father's home. The father and his estate have a ketubot obligation to feed his daughter while she is young, minor, and unmarried. So we're talking about that amount. That is this Baraita is saying is not a subjective standard, how much his father liked to spend on dinner, but rather an objective standard that we assess based on the amount of the property. Okay, so now that way we answered the question of Shemuel, but we're not happy yet. Hold on, there's two things in the Baraita. It says nizonet, so that's already talking about food. So therefore, mitparnesot, nizonet is already talking about food that she has while she's single. So therefore, my parnasot must be talking about the dowry, right? So one of them is parnasat habal, the other one is parnasat asma. So this is including the dowry and saying it's an objective percentage against Shemuel. So we answer lo idi v'idi parnasat asma. Both of them are talking about what the estate has to give her while she's young, while she's a minor and single. V'lo kashya ha b'achila b'shtiya v'ha bilbusha v'chisuya. And the two words, well, the nizonet is talking about food and drink, and mitparnesot is talking about clothing and bed coverings. So there's no problem with Shemuel. All right, so we answered that question. But we're going to have another question against Shemuel. Again, Shemuel said that it's a subjective standard that we do the mind reading, what the father would have wanted. So we have to say, Tenan, Hachamim, we're going to quote our Mishnah, where Hachamim say, against Rabbi Yehuda, Pamim shadam ha'ani ve'ashir, or ashir ve'ani, ela shemin achasim ve'notnin la. We saw that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we look at the first daughter, how much did he give the first daughter, and based on that, we can assume that he would give the same amount for the second daughter. In other words, it's subjective based on what we think he would have given. And that would be inconsistent. The view that would be consistent with Shemuel. But Chachamim, the majority opinion, disagree and say No, it's an objective percentage of the property. The Chachamim, therefore, are not consistent with Shemuel. We further sharpen the challenge by proving that, according to Chachamim, we do not follow a subjective standard at all, not only if his assets change, but also if his mindset changes. So we ask, Mai ani umai ashir, what does poor and rich mean? Ine ma ani b'nechasim, ashir b'nechasim. If we follow the usual meaning, poor means little wealth. Ashir means a lot of wealth. Mikilad Tanakamasa barafilu ashir ve'ani kedemei kadai habinana ha letle. So what would that mean for Tanakama, who was Rabbi Yehuda? So he would say, even if he was rich when the first daughter got married and he was alive, and so he gave her a big dowry, and then he became poor and he died. So now when he dies, he has only a little bit of property and the second daughter is going to get married. Are you saying, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda said you have to treat the second like the first. So you should give her the same amount as the first? Halete, but he simply doesn't have the money. So it's impossible to understand rich and poor in the words of Chachamim to mean actually rich and actually poor, because that doesn't make sense for Rabbi Yehuda, and they have to be arguing about the same case. Elalav ani bedaat, ashir bedaat. Rather, poor means poor in his mindset, means even if he has money, but he's very stingy and doesn't want to spend money. And ashir means he's rich in his mindset, that he is happy to give a lot of dowry. He's very generous. And sometimes people change. Alma lo azinan batar umdena. And nevertheless, even though he changed his mindset, the Chachamim do not take that into account. Rather, they say, we assess the amount of the property and we take a percentage of it and we follow the assessment. So that is the opinion of Chachamim. So it's clear the Chachamim say you follow an absolute objective percentage of the amount. And that is against Shemuel that says we psychoanalyze what his mindset would be. No, it doesn't matter what his mindset is. Shemuel goes against Chachamim. Our answer is that indeed, you're right. Shemuel follows Rabbi Yehuda, even though it's a minority opinion. Sometimes that happens. Ditnan, Rabbi Yehuda omer, im hisi et bat harishona, yinaten lasheniya keder shenatan larishona. Our Mishnah, if he married off the first, he should give the same amount to the second. In other words, we're going to assess his mindset based on his prior actions. So we know, we assume that he stayed the same, and someone who's generous is going to continue to be generous. That's the point. If he's stingy for the first one, he probably is going to continue to be stingy. People don't generally change their character traits. Hachamim say sometimes they do, so it's impossible to assess. That's why they follow an objective standard. So there we go. Shemuel follows Rabbi Yehuda. Good. Now, Shemuel, how come you don't just say a simple sentence? Halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Why do you have to make up your own words? Because if he said halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, I would have thought we only follow his mindset when he already married off a first person, because then he revealed what his mindset is. But if he never married, this is the first daughter getting married, then there's no way to know. And in that case, we would have followed an objective standard. Kamashmalan, tamad Rabbi Yehuda, dazlin batar umdena, lo shena siya, velo shena lo siya. That's why Shemuel used his own words to say, we follow an assessment of his mindset, to teach that he was following Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it doesn't matter whether he had married off a daughter earlier or didn't marry off a daughter earlier. Nevertheless, we know him, right? People ask around, what does he like to spend? And we can assess, even if we have no prior record of a dowry. Okay, so then why, in fact, in the Mishnah, does Yehuda say that if talk about a case where he already married off one daughter, if it's the same law, whether he married off a daughter or not, is to teach you the strength of the rabbis, that even if he already gave a dowry to his first daughter, the first daughter who got married, and he revealed what kind of mindset he is, nevertheless, we don't assume that the same mindset for the second. Maybe he changed his mindset. and therefore we follow the assessment no matter what. So because it wanted to teach us that chidush for Chachamim, that's why Rabbi Yehuda said it's talking about a case, even it's talking about a case where someone already got married, although Rabbi Yehuda would say we follow an assessment of the mindset even if no daughter yet got married yet. Amar leRava leRav Chisda, Tashina mishimcha halacha keRabbi Yehuda. Rav Chisda's name actually has not come up before, but we're assuming that he would agree with this assessment that Shemuel must have agreed with Rabbi Yehuda. So can we lecture this even though it's a minority opinion? Amar le Yehed kol ki hanemile ma'aliyata tidreshu mishemai. He says, yes, may it be God's will that you should teach all such wonderful statements in my name. I'd be honored to be quoted saying this. Oh, good. Now we ask, and did Rava also agree that halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda? And the fact that Rava is asking the question, can we teach this? That means Rava wanted to teach that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So did Rava think that we follow the subjective standard? V'hatanya Rabbi Omer, ba'tanizonit minachin notelet isur nechasim. V'amar Rava hilcheta keRabbi. We have a baraita that quotes Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, not the same as the Rabbi Yehuda from the fourth generation. This is for the fifth generation. Rabbi says that a daughter is fed from the brothers, from the property that they inherit. When she gets money from the brothers, she takes a tenth of the property for the dowry, which means it's an absolute objective percentage of the entire property, not based on what we think is the father's mindset. And Rava said that is the halacha. So you see, Rava thinks that we follow an objective percentage and not the subjective that Rabbi said and Shemuel said. So we answered la kashya ha de amidne ha de la im amidne. It depends on whether we're able to assess what the father wanted. When we talked about Rabbi Yehuda up here, when he said, I would agree with Rav Chisda, that we followed Rabbi Yehuda and we assessed the father's mindset, that's when we knew the father. He lived around the community and we people did business with him, and so we know and we're able to. But if we're not able to, he lives somewhere else, no one knows what his mindset is, then we follow the objective standard of Rabbi. So that's why Rava actually said two different things. And in fact, this answer that we were kind of forced into is in fact quite reasonable. Damar Rav Ada bar Ahava Ma'aseh Natana Rabbi Ehad Mishanem Asad Banechasim. Because Rabbi himself, we have the story where he gave a certain orphaned bride 1/12 of the father's property. So 1/12, that's not 1/10. Over here he said 1/10. But in that story he gave 1/12. Why? Kashan hadadeh. So the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is contradicting himself. Rather, you see that in order to reconcile the B, we have to assume that when he said, do you give a tenth, that's what Rava quoted, that's talking about where we were unable to assess what his mindset is. So we did the standard amount of 1/10. Whereas, in this case, story that we quoted later, when he said 1/12, that was because we did know, and we were able to realize that he was a little stingier than average, so he only gave a 12th rather than a 10th. And so since we're going to have to say this in order to reconcile to Rabbi himself, so when Rava says halacha is like Rabbi, it makes perfect sense that Rava would agree with Rabbi that it depends on, we can only assess when there is something to go by, when we know him. All right, Gufa Amar Rabbi. Now more analysis of the statement of Rabbi. Habat nizonet minachin notelet isur nechasim. The daughter who is sustained from an inheritance that the brothers have, she gets 1/10 of the dowry. Okay, so that was he was saying that assuming she is young and so she's a minor, and that's why she gets she continues to be fed from the inheritance. So too, when she gets married off as a minor, she will get a tenth of the dowry. So the others say to the B, according to you, that there's an absolute objective percentage. What if a man has 10 daughters and a son. So now the daughters are going to each get 10%. That adds up to 100%. That means the son will have 0. The son will inherit nothing. So that doesn't make sense that we should give a tenth to every daughter. So he answers, Amalahan, this is how I calculate it. The first one does get 10%. The next one will only get 10% of what's left over. So that would be, the first one took 10, there's 90 left, 10% of that. The second one will only take 9%. The third one will take what's left over of that. We'll end up going 7.3%, 6.6%. 5.9, 5.3, 4.8, 4.3, and the last one would get 3.9. Now you'll say, hold on, that's not really fair, that the oldest one will get 10% and the last one to get married just because she's younger and she waited longer, she only gets 3.9? No. What they do is they add up what all that adds up to, the sum of all those percentages, the average, which ends up being 65% of the total. And they split that into 10 parts. So it's not that the first gets 10% and the last gets 3.9, but we do the calculation, what that would be, and then add it all up. It's 65%, and so therefore they each get 6.5. All the daughters get 6.5%, and that leaves over 35% for the son. So that's how the B does it. Okay, kol chada v'chada denafsha shakla. And now we ask, wait, why do that? Maybe each daughter should get the 10% at the time. After all, if the father was alive, right, he would give 10% to the first one, and then there would be less for the second. And so why not, in fact, go from 10 all the way down to the last one gets only 3.9%? So we meant to say, you're right, if they get married at different times, then indeed, that's what would happen if the father was alive. That's what happens now that the father has died. When the Rebbe said in the Braita that they distribute equally, that was talking about a case where they all come and get married at the same time. They all met their husbands, all 10 of them, and they're getting married at the same time. So then we're not going to give the oldest one or any one of them 10, another one 3.9, but rather we add it all up, divide it by 10, it comes out to 6.5. Okay, Misele the Rav Matana, and this supports what Rav Matana said. The Rav Matana, kulam ke'ahad, if all the daughters come and get married at the same time, notlot isur ehad, they take 1/10. Now we ask, isur ehad zakadatech, all of them only get a tenth? All 10 of them, that's 1% each? No, obviously not. Ella not isur ke'achad. Rather, they take a tenth equally. So they can't each get a tenth because then that would leave the son with nothing. Instead, it means that we do the calculation as above and each get 6.5%. All right, next baraita, unrelated subject in Rabbanan. Habanot ben bagru ad shelo nisu, ben nisu ad shelo bagru ibedu mizonotehen. One of the requirements in the Ketubot is that the father or his estate has to feed his daughters. Until when? Well, until either they become an adult, they become 12 and a half, even if they're not married, or they become married, even if they're not an adult yet. Either way, the inheritance does not need to pay for their food anymore. Ve'lo ibedu parnasatan, and also, they do not lose their, parnasatan here means dowry. So according to the B, they only get food when they are young, minors, and unmarried. Once they either grow up or they are married, they lose their food sustenance stipend. But their dowry, they keep. So even if she's an adult, she still gets the 1/10 dowry, according to the B. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Af ibedu parnasatan. He says, no, once they become an adult, then they lose their right to the dowry. So this is not good. Kesad hen also. So what should they do? If they don't find a husband when they're a minor, what are they going to do? So they will hire a husband, and that way they can extract the dowry. They kind of do some kind of marriage so that they'll get their dowry, and then I guess if it works out, they'll stay. If not, then not. But the point is, they do some kind of a loophole, a marriage for a day or something like that, so that they get their dowry amount and get out while they can, and then they'll, if since she has the money, then she'll be okay. All right. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar li huna hilcheta kedebi. We follow the B that she gets the dowry even after she grows up. Iti be Rava Nachman. Rava asks a question to Rav Nachman. Yetoma. Shesiata ima o acheha midata. He's quoting our Mishnah that says a orphan girl whose mother or brother marry her off, and she agrees to it. Vechatvu la b'me'ah o b'chamishim zuz. But at the time, their brothers say, "Oh, we're only giving you 100, only 50." They chinch out. Since she got married when she was a minor, when she grows up, she can protest and say, "Hey, I want the full amount." That was our Mishnah. Tama diktana, hagedola vitera. So we can infer from the fact that the Mishnah talked about only a case of a minor who was married off. Then when she grows up, she has a right. That means if she got married as an adult, then she loses her right. And that seems to be a proof for Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and a challenge to Rabbi. So, Rav Nachman, how could you say that halacha is like Rabbi if it goes against the Mishnah? And we answer, La kashya, ha dimchai, ha de la mechai. Oh, it depends if she protests or not. When she's an adult, so if she's a minor and she grows up, then she can protest and say, I want it. If she is an adult, she protests, then she does collect the whole dowry, as Rabbi said. But if she is an adult and she doesn't protest, the brothers who hold the estate say, "Hey, we're going to give you just 50," and she says, "Okay." And then later on, after she's married, she says, "Wait a second, I want the whole thing." No good. She has to say it at the time of the marriage if she's an adult. So in fact, we can reconcile Rabbi with the Mishnah. And in fact, this makes sense, this answer for Rabbi. Dimken, kasha Rabbi, because if we don't answer that way, we'll have a contradiction between two statements of Rabbi. Tanya, Rabbi Omer, bat hanizonet min hachin notelet isur nesachim nizonet in shena nizonet la. We had a braita we saw earlier that according to Rabbi, a daughter whose father died, and she receives sustenance from the brothers. Receives sustenance, that means she's a minor. That's when she receives sustenance. So if she is a minor and she has sustenance, then she gets isur nasachim, she gets a tenth in the dowry. So it sounds like if she's a minor, yes, she gets a dowry. If she's not a minor, if she's an adult, then she does not get one. Now, how could this be? Rabbi here says that as an adult she does not get a dowry, but this baraita here said that she does get a dowry, even as the full dowry of a tenth, even as an adult. Rather, the one that says that she gets it is where she protested at the time of the wedding. Before she got married, she says, "No, I want my full amount." So that's what's talking about in the Braita above. And here, this Braita says only if she's a minor, that's when she doesn't protest. If she's a minor and doesn't protest at the time of the marriage, well, she was a child, so she didn't know better. Then she has a right to come later on and collect it. But if she's an adult and at the time of the marriage she says, "Okay, fine, I'm good with 50," then she loses her right to come and ask for it afterwards. So Shema Mina, we learned that in fact we must say that Rabbi will distinguish between those two cases. Good. Amar le Ravina le Rava. Amar lan Rav Ada barahava mishemach. Ravina says to Rava that Rav Ada said this following thing in your name, Rava, that you said this. What did he say? Bagra ena siricha limchot. Niset ena siricha limchot. Bagra veniset siricha limchot. If a girl grows up and becomes an adult, so then from her birthday onwards, when she comes to get married, she does not need to protest. She gets the 1/10. She can assume that she will get the 1/10 without protesting. This is going to be the main line we need. If she was already married as a child and she agreed to less, to just 50 zuz, then she does not need to protest at the time of the marriage. When she grows up, she can always come and demand it later. However, if she was an adult and she married as an adult and she agreed to 50, then she needs to protest right at that time. If they offer 50, the brothers offer 50, she has to protest right at that time and say, no, I'm not okay with that. Otherwise, because she's an adult and she already married, agreeing to that, it's no good. She has to protest before the marriage. Okay, so that is, they said, we heard Rava say that. Say the statement. But did he really say this? We just saw that Rava is the one that challenged Rav Nachman from our Mishnah, which was the case of a Yetoma, and it said that yes, a minor who gets married and the brothers give her less than 50, then when she grows, she does not need to protest. When she grows up, she can come and say, hey, you owe me the full 10th. And the essence of the question was, you see, the Mishnah only says a minor, but if it's an adult, then the adult cannot collect. And that was a contradiction. And Vishani le, and he answered, ha demache, ha de lamache, that the Mishnah is talking about a case where she did not protest. That's why she would only get it as a minor, but not as an adult, because the adult did not protest as an adult. But if she did protest as an adult, that was the braita over there, that as an adult she can collect. And so, since Rava was involved in that conversation, must be that he agrees that in order for her to collect as an adult, she has to protest. But over here it says an adult does not need to protest. So which one is it? And we answer, ha de kamit zena minayu, ha de la kamit zena minayu. We add yet another factor. If she's still being sustained by the brothers, even after the marriage, like the brothers are very nice, they really don't have to, because we saw after she's married or becomes an adult, they don't have to give her food anymore. But let's say they do give her some food. And so that's why she was embarrassed to come and protest when they said, we're only going to give you 50. In that case, there's a good reason why she shouldn't protest. So her lack of protesting is not really, it does not show that she agreed to it. And in that case, she can come after and say, hey, I demand, I want to come and take it. So that's why it says here, whereas the Mishnah that just assumed only as a minor, she doesn't have to protest. But as an adult, she does have to protest. That's when she was not being sustained by them. And that's why she had no reason to be embarrassed and say, hey, I want the full amount. Since she was an adult and she didn't ask for the full amount, therefore she loses out. All right. Now, one last point about the obligation of the father to pay for the dowry. Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi, Parnasa ena kitnai ketubah. The dowry that the father has to give to his daughter does not have the same status as a stipulation in the ketubah. A stipulation in the ketubah would be like the added amount over the 200 that the husband agrees to give her. So these are different. So how are they different? Mai ena kitnai ketubah. Inema deilu parnasa tarfa me mishabede. Utnai ketubah la tarfa me mishabede. Mai kamash malan. If this means that the amount for the dowry that the father needs to give to his daughter can be collected from liened property, whereas the condition of a ketubah does not get collected from liened property. Now, generally, ketubah and anything in the ketubah can be, she collects it from land, but not if the land is already sold. Then they can't go back and recollect the land that was sold. There's no lien to pay for a ketubah or the conditions of the ketubah. So, according to this answer, the obligation to pay for a dowry would be even greater. So then we ask, "Mai kamash malan?" Well, what is this teaching? Hamasim bechol yom mosin leparnasa ve'en mosin limzonot. We see all the time cases where we appropriate money from lien property to pay for the dowry, but we do not do that for the other obligations of the ketubah. So this is obvious. Okay, so maybe you'll say that the paying the dowry also is stronger because she can collect it from movable items, whereas the conditions of the ketubah only from land and not from movable items. Well, let it be idi v'idi migba gabya. According to the Biuda Nasi, both the dowry amount and the condition of the ketubah are collected from land and movables. The Tanya echad nechassim sheyesh lahem achrayut, v'echad nechassim she'en lahem achrayut, mosin lemzon ha'isha v'labanot ibnei Rabbi. Rabbi thinks that both of them can be collected. So therefore, that would not be a difference between the two. So this is in the name of Rabbi. So that can't be what Rabbi meant. So what distinction is Rabbi in fact making between them? Ela mai parnasa ena kitnai ketubah. What did Rabbi mean that the dowry payment is not the same as the condition of the ketubah? Liched Tanya Haomer al yizonu benotav menechasav and shomin lo al yitparnesu benotav menechasav shomin lo shaparnasa ena ketena ketubah. So this is the final answer. That if a father says, I don't want before he dies, he says, I don't want my daughters to be fed from my property. He refuses that. We don't listen to him because that's one of the basic conditions in the ketubah, so he has to do it. He is pre-obligated. He has no way to deny that. However, if he says, I don't want my daughters to get a dowry from my estate, that he has a right to do that. Just like when he's alive, he can say, I don't want to give a dowry. Like we saw above, he makes a stipulation with the future son-in-law, so I'm not giving a dowry. Right? So that he has a right to. It's not very nice to do, but he has a right to do it. Because a dowry is not like a Tanai Ketubah, so it must be that's what the Biuda Nasi meant by his statement. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen v'Amen.